There's a reason it's called a rosary and not a bead chain or a prayer necklace. The reason is beautiful. The word comes from the Latin rosarium, which means literally a garden of roses. In the Middle Ages, rose gardens were associated with the Virgin Mary. Artists placed the scene of the Annunciation among flowering rose bushes. But the connection runs deeper than decorative botany. A medieval legend from the 13th century, documented in Latin, Catalan, and German versions, tells of a monk praying his Hail Marys when something extraordinary happened. The words, as they left his lips, transformed into roses, one by one, and those roses formed a garland in Mary's hands. In German, the word for rosary is Rosenkranz, a crown of roses. The medieval tradition went further. It held that each Hail Mary is a rose with 5 petals, one for each phrase of the prayer, and that those petals represent the letters M-A-R-I-A. So when you pray a full rosary of 5 decades, you're weaving a garland of 50 roses to place in the Virgin's hands. If you pray all 20 mysteries, you're planting an entire garden. Sit with that for a moment. You're not repeating prayers. You're cultivating invisible flowers. You're building a garden that can't be seen with the eyes, but that, according to the faith of millions, perfumes heaven itself. And that is extraordinarily beautiful. What the rosary actually is. Beyond the poetry, we need to understand what the rosary is in its full dimension. Because reducing it to a string of beads for repeating prayers is like calling a symphony a series of notes, technically accurate, completely insufficient. The rosary is simultaneously several things: a devotional artifact, a meditative system, a psychological anchor, a communal bond, and for hundreds of millions of people, a direct channel towards something that transcends them. From a liturgical perspective, the complete rosary contains 20 mysteries, episodes from the lives of Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary, grouped into 4 cycles: joyful, luminous, sorrowful, and glorious. Each mystery is accompanied by 1 Our Father, 10 Hail Marys, and 1 Glory Be. The structure is deliberate. It functions as a mental architecture that carries you through a complete narrative arc, from the Annunciation to the coronation of Mary in heaven. But notice something. The Rosary does not belong exclusively to Catholicism, and this matters because it reveals something deep about what we are as human beings. A phenomenon without borders. In Islam, there is the tasbih or misbah, with 99 beads corresponding to the 99 names of Allah. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the japamala, with 108 beads. In Eastern Orthodox Christianity, the chotki, or komboskini, a knotted cord. In Sikhism, Tibetan Buddhism, the Baha'i faith, even in Western initiatory traditions, repetitive prayer supported by touch appears again and again. 2/3 of the world's religions use some form of beaded cord for their devotional practices. 2/3. That is not coincidence. It is evidence that we are looking at a fundamental contemplative technology, perhaps the most basic and universal one humanity has ever developed. Where does that convergence come from? There are 2 answers. The first is cultural diffusion. Trade routes, conquests, and migrations carried prayer beads from one place to another. The earliest records of using beads for prayer go back roughly to the 8th century BC in India, though the oldest bead necklaces found in ritual contexts are approximately 4,200 years old. In Africa, ornamental beads have been dated to 10,000 BC. The second answer is deeper, and I think it's the one that matters. Functional convergence. When human beings try to sustain attention on the transcendent, they need a sensory anchor. Beads provide exactly that. A tactile rhythm that frees the mind from the effort of counting. An object that occupies the hands and connects them to the intention of the heart. A circularity, the mala, the rosary, the misbaha are circles without beginning or end, symbolizing the eternal. This need is universal because the human body is universal. The limitations of human attention are the same in Varanasi, in Mecca, in Fatima, and in Lhasa. And that should give us pause. Because it means that when you take a rosary in your hands, you are doing something human beings have done across every culture and every century since before writing existed. You are performing an ancient gesture, one your body recognizes even if your mind does not. The mystery of the repeated word. And now we reach the heart of the matter. Because the most common objection to the rosary is this: why repeat the same thing over and over? Isn't that boring? Isn't it mechanical? Isn't that exactly what Jesus condemned when he spoke of vain repetitions? Let's take this apart. Jesus said in Matthew 6, verse 7, "When you pray, do not use vain repetitions." The key word is vain. Jesus did not condemn repetition. He condemned empty repetition, heartless repetition, intentionless repetition. The difference between vain repetition and devoted repetition is the difference between saying, "I love you" out of habit and saying it while looking someone in the eyes. The words are identical. The intention is an abyss. And here is where the mystics of every tradition agree on something that defies ordinary logic. Repetition, which from the outside looks monotonous, from the inside is experienced as a progressive descent into ever deeper layers of meaning. The repeated word does not wear thin with use. It deepens, like digging a well. Every strike of the shovel looks the same as the last, but each one brings you closer to water. St. John Cassian, in the 5th century, recommended that the monks of the desert repeat a single phrase without ceasing. "O God, come to my assistance. O Lord, make haste to help me." His argument was not that the phrase held some magical power. His argument was that constant repetition produced what he called puritas cordis, purity of heart, a state of interior transparency in which the mind, emptied of its habitual noise, became capable of perceiving something that had always been there, but that the noise wouldn't let it hear. The anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing, a 14th century English mystical text, went further. He recommended choosing a single monosyllabic word, God or love, and repeating it ceaselessly, like a hammer striking the same rock until it breaks. For this mystic, repetition was not a way to think better about God. It was a way to stop thinking, to pierce through the cloud of concepts that separates us from the divine. Repetition destroys the illusion that God can be grasped by the intellect. He can only be loved, and love expresses itself in constancy, not novelty. Pause on that idea. Constancy, not novelty. We live in a culture that worships the new, the viral, the thing that changes every 5 seconds. And here is a tradition, thousands of years old, saying the exact opposite. Depth is not found by chasing something new each day. Depth is found by returning to the same thing until the same thing reveals itself as inexhaustible. What science has to say. And if you think all of this is just medieval mysticism, listen to what neuroscience has found. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist at Thomas Jefferson University, has used neuroimaging technology to scan the brains of people in contemplative prayer. His findings show decreased activity in the superior parietal lobe, the brain region that constructs the perception of the self as separate from the environment. and increased activity in the frontal lobe, associated with concentration and intention. In plain terms, deep repetitive prayer produces a neurological state of unification and focus that is structurally similar to deep meditation. Your brain, when you pray with intention, physically changes. But there's more. In 2001, a study published in the British Medical Journal by Luciano Bernardi and his colleagues demonstrated something remarkable. Praying the Hail Mary in Latin produced a respiratory rhythm of approximately 6 cycles per minute, synchronizing breathing with cardiovascular rhythms in an optimal way. And this rhythm coincides with that of Buddhist mantras recited at their traditional cadence. Do you understand what that implies? The structure of the Rosary, without anyone having designed it for that conscious purpose, produces physiological effects that benefit cardiovascular health. Regardless of what you believe, regardless of your religion, your body responds to the rhythm of the Rosary the way it responds to the rhythm of the heart, because they are synchronized. The Neuropsychology of Religion and Spirituality, edited by Brick Johnstone and Brett Glass, compiles research that goes further still. Repetitive prayer activates brain regions associated with emotional regulation and anxiety reduction. The social component of the Rosary, when prayed in a group, activates neural networks of belonging and interpersonal synchrony. And here is what the authors say with intellectual honesty. Neuroscience cannot pronounce on the supernatural reality of religious experiences. Neurological correlates neither prove nor disprove the existence of a transcendent dimension. What science does demonstrate is that the Rosary operates on a neurobiological level that is independent of the practitioner's beliefs. It has power in the most empirical sense of the word. It produces measurable changes in the brain and in the body. Romano Guardini, the theologian who wrote one of the most clear-eyed books on the Rosary, explained it from another angle. The physical component of the Rosary, the beads, the fingers, the posture, the rhythm, is essential, not incidental. The body prays as much as the mind. Repetition functions like rhythm in music. It creates a temporal space within which contemplation can unfold freely. And Guardini warns against the temptation to think too much during the Rosary. Meditating on the mysteries should be contemplative, looking, being present, not analytical, dissecting, arguing. You are not solving a problem. You are inhabiting a mystery. The two prayers that hold everything up. Let's talk about the two prayers that form the backbone of the Rosary, because examining them reveals why they carry such weight. The Our Father is the prayer Jesus himself taught when his disciples asked him, "Teach us to pray." It is the only prayer in all of history composed directly by God made man. It contains 7 petitions that cover the totality of existence: recognition of God's transcendence, surrender to his will, a request for sustenance, forgiveness, protection, and deliverance. In 7 sentences, Jesus compressed the entire theology of prayer. Every Our Father in the Rosary is, literally, praying in the words of God. The Hail Mary has 2 halves, and most people never stop to think about them. The first half is drawn from Scripture, the greeting of the angel Gabriel to Mary and the exclamation of Saint Elizabeth. The second half is a supplication from the Church. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Look at the architecture. The first half celebrates, the second half pleads. The first looks backward, to the Incarnation. The second looks forward, to your death. And at the center of everything, like a sun, is the name of Jesus. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Every time you pray a Hail Mary, you are repeating the same words an archangel spoke. the same words Mary's cousin spoke, and you are asking a mother's intercession for the most critical moment of your life. This is not a prayer to Mary instead of Christ. It is a prayer through Mary toward Christ. When you understand that, the repetition stops being mechanical and starts being a heartbeat. The Rosary as spiritual training. Now I want to talk about something very practical, because theory matters, but what transforms a life is practice. Think of the Rosary as spiritual training, a workout for the soul. Nobody goes to the gym one day and expects to walk out transformed. Transformation happens in the accumulation, in the discipline of showing up when you don't feel like it, in the constancy when results are invisible. The Rosary works the same way. The first days will be hard, brutally. Your mind will wander. You'll be thinking about tomorrow's to-do list by the third decade. You'll find yourself half asleep during the fourth mystery. You'll feel like you're talking to the ceiling. This is completely normal. Every saint who ever loved the Rosary went through the same thing. Every single one. Sister Lucia of Fatima had a phrase for those who fell asleep praying, "Always start it, and if you don't finish it, the Virgin will finish it for you." That is not an excuse for laziness. It is grace for imperfection. The key is to start. Every day, no matter how it goes. And here I want to propose something drawn from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, applied to the Rosary. Because the principles he identified for building lasting habits fit the practice of the Rosary with startling precision. The first principle is to make it obvious. Clear says the best trigger for a habit is context. What you see around you determines what you do. Applied to the Rosary, leave it where you can see it. On the nightstand, next to the car keys, on the pillow. Don't bury it in a drawer hoping your willpower will remind you to dig it out. Environment wins every time. If the Rosary is visible, the odds you'll pick it up multiply. If it's hidden, it stays hidden. The second principle is to make it easy. Don't commit to praying the full Rosary every day. Commit to something much smaller. Pick up the Rosary every night. That's it. Make it so easy that failure is impossible. Clear calls this the 2-minute rule. Every new habit should start in under 2 minutes. 1 decade of the Rosary takes less than 3 minutes. Start there. Just 1 decade. 10 Hail Marys. And if you want to keep going when you finish, keep going. And if you don't, you already prayed. You already started. That small act is infinitely more valuable than the intention to pray 5 mysteries that never materializes. The third principle is habit stacking. Link it to something you already do every day without thinking. After you brush your teeth, pick up the Rosary. After you park the car, pray 1 decade before you get out. After you lie down in bed and before you reach for the phone, pass the beads through your fingers. The existing habit functions as an anchor that drags the new one along with it. You don't depend on motivation, which is fickle. You depend on structure, which is solid. The fourth principle, and maybe the most powerful, is identity. Clear says true change doesn't start with what you do. It starts with who you believe you are. You are not someone trying to pray the Rosary. You are someone who prays the Rosary. The difference between those 2 sentences is a chasm. The first gives you permission to fail. The second gives you an identity to defend. Every time you pick up the Rosary, even if it's only 1 decade, even if you're exhausted, even if you feel nothing, you are casting a vote for the person you want to become. Each decade is a vote, and votes accumulate until they become identity. And there is a fifth principle Clear emphasizes that applies to the Rosary with particular force. Never miss twice in a row. One bad day is human. 2 bad days is the beginning of a new habit, and that habit is called not praying. If you didn't pray yesterday, today is the most important day of your practice. Not the day to punish yourself, the day to return. 1 decade, 2 minutes. The return is what matters, not the perfect streak. Clear's insight is that the secret isn't being perfect, it's being consistent. And consistency is built on the minimum viable effort, not the maximum idealized one. The perfect Rosary, prayed on your knees in absolute silence, with deep meditation on every mystery, is the ideal. But the imperfect Rosary, prayed in traffic, half asleep, with a scattered mind, is infinitely more powerful than the perfect Rosary that never gets prayed. Where, when, and how? The Rosary is extraordinarily versatile in its moments and spaces, and I want to give you concrete options because practicality is what turns a good intention into an actual habit. You can pray it in bed, in your garden, in your favorite corner of the house. The place doesn't need to be a church. It needs to be a space where you can be present. Some people create a small altar with an image, a candle, their rosary. That corner becomes saturated with prayer over time. It starts to feel different, as if the walls remember. You can pray it in silence, and silence is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of attention. If you can't find exterior silence, seek interior silence. Close your eyes. Breathe. Begin. You can pray it while walking. There is an ancient tradition of praying the Rosary in motion. John Paul II prayed it walking through the Vatican gardens. The body's movement and the rhythm of the steps synchronize with the beads and the words, creating a walking meditation backed by 15 centuries of monastic tradition. You can pray it in the car. Play a guided rosary on your phone while you drive. It is not ideal, your eyes are on the road, not closed in contemplation, but it is infinitely better than not praying. Many people discovered the daily rosary precisely on the commute to work. You can pray it while doing the dishes, folding laundry, sweeping. Your hands are busy, but your mind is free. The Benedictine nuns call this ora et labora. Pray and work, and it works. Every moment has its own flavor. The morning rosary is a shield. You sharpen the blade before walking into the battle of the day. The midday rosary is an anchor. It recalibrates you when anxiety presses in or a decision weighs heavy. The evening rosary is a blanket. You surrender what you've lived and prepare yourself for rest. The silence after the last bead. And there is something almost nobody tells you about the Rosary, something that can completely transform the experience. What happens after the last Hail Mary? When you finish the Rosary, don't stand up immediately. Don't grab the phone. Don't throw yourself at the next item on your list. Stay for a moment. 1 minute. 2. In pure silence. No words. No petitions. No directed thoughts. Just presence. During the entire Rosary, you were speaking. You were asking, meditating, repeating. Now is the moment to fall silent and listen. If you spent 20 minutes talking to God, doesn't it make sense to give Him at least 1 minute to talk to you? This silence after the Rosary is a space of pure contemplation. You don't need to do anything in it. You don't need to feel anything special. Just be available, open, like someone who finishes knocking on a door and stands still, waiting, attentive to the faintest sound from the other side. Sometimes nothing perceptible happens in that silence, and that's fine. Other times, a clarity you didn't have arrives in that silence, a peace you can't explain, a quiet certainty about something that was troubling you. Not always, but when it comes, you know the wait was worth it. Contemplative monks of every tradition know that silence is not the absence of prayer. It is prayer's culmination. Repetitive prayer prepares the soil. Silence is where the seed germinates. Don't miss the harvest by getting up too soon. Try it. The next time you finish your rosary, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and stay. Just 1 minute. Let the last words dissipate and listen to what remains. The mysteries as mirrors of your life. And now I want you to understand something that completely changes the experience of praying. The 20 mysteries are not episodes from an ancient story. They are mirrors of your daily life. The joyful mysteries speak of beginnings, of unexpected announcements, of visits, of births, of finding what had been lost. Are you starting a new project? Did you receive news that changes everything? Are you searching for someone or something you've lost? The joyful mysteries are yours. The luminous mysteries speak of identity, transformation, revelation, and commitment. Are you discovering who you really are? Are you in a moment of profound change? Do you feel a calling you can't explain? The luminous mysteries walk beside you. The sorrowful mysteries speak of suffering, of betrayal, of humiliation, of burdens that seem unbearable. Are you in pain? Were you failed by someone? Are you carrying a weight that's crushing you? The sorrowful mysteries do not deny your pain. They accompany it with the pain of Christ. You are not alone in what you are going through. The glorious mysteries speak of resurrection, of rising, of final transformation. Did you come out of a crisis? Did you overcome what seemed impossible? Do you sense something more waiting for you, something luminous at the end of the tunnel? The glorious mysteries are the promise that every suffering has an after. When you pray while meditating on the mysteries, you are not remembering events from 2,000 years ago. You are placing your life inside a larger story. You are giving your pain a context, your joy a root, your uncertainty a compass. Pope Paul VI said it in a phrase worth etching into memory. The Rosary is a compendium of the entire Gospel. You don't need to read a library of theology. In 20 mysteries, the entire story of salvation fits. It is theology in miniature, accessible to anyone who cannot read a single verse. And that is precisely the most powerful idea John Paul II developed in his letter Rosarium Virginis Mariae, the same letter in which he added the luminous mysteries in 2002. The Rosary is a school of prayer. It teaches contemplation, meditation, and adoration progressively. It carries the one who prays from vocal prayer, moving the lips, to deep contemplation. And the Marian element does not replace the Christological one. It facilitates it. Mary is the lens through which her son is contemplated, like a mother who points and says, "Look at him." What the books teach. I want to stop here to share ideas from a handful of books that have explored the power of the Rosary from very different angles. Not as an academic list, but as conversations with authors who spent years thinking about this. Saint Louis de Montfort wrote The Secret of the Rosary at the beginning of the 18th century, and his claim is radical. The Rosary is not just another devotion. It is, he says, the most powerful one after the Holy Mass. And its strength does not reside in the one who prays it, but in the intercession of Mary. That means it is accessible to everyone, to the saint and to the broken, to the theologian, and to the illiterate. You don't need your own merit. You just need to begin. But Montfort also warns with almost clinical precision about the ways of praying badly, with haste without intention, with voluntary distraction without meditation. His argument is uncomfortable. A poorly prayed rosary is not merely ineffective. It can be harmful because it breeds a false spiritual security. It makes you feel you've done your part when all you actually did was move your lips. Does that sound familiar? It sounds familiar to me, because we've all been there. We've all prayed a rosary while thinking about something else entirely. And Montfort does not condemn you for that. He invites you to do better, to be aware, to treat each Hail Mary as if it were the only one you'll ever pray. On a different end of the spectrum, Dwight Longenecker wrote Praying the Rosary for Inner Healing, where he proposes something that transforms the experience, using each mystery as an instrument of personal healing. The Annunciation is associated with openness to the new, the Crucifixion with processing pain, the Resurrection with the hope of renewal. The idea is to turn the Rosary into a form of narrative therapy. By inhabiting the stories of the mysteries, you can project your own story onto a wider framework of meaning. And something needs to be said here. For people who lack access to professional mental health services, particularly in poor communities, the Rosary may be the only resource for emotional care available to them. It is not a substitute for professional therapy when that is needed. But it is a real resource, free and accessible, that has sustained millions of people who had nothing else. Liz Kelly, in The Rosary, A Path into Prayer, compares the Rosary with mindfulness meditation in its capacity to anchor attention in the present. And she makes an observation I find essential. The Rosary is a democratic prayer. It requires no education, no sanctity, no special conditions, only a handful of beads and the willingness to start. And William Byron, the Jesuit who wrote Why We Pray, uses a metaphor I haven't been able to forget. Prayer is the breathing of the soul, as necessary and as unspectacular as breathing. The Rosary, from this perspective, is a spiritual respiratory rhythm. You don't notice it when you do it, but if you stop, everything begins to suffocate. Byron explores a paradox worth considering. What does it mean to pray for specific intentions, health, work, a relationship, within a theology that doesn't conceive of God as a vending machine for favors? His answer is subtle. Prayer doesn't change God. It changes the one who prays. And that interior change manifests in actions that, those, yes, transform reality. So does the Rosary work? That depends on what you mean by work. If you expect an automatic dispenser where you insert prayers and receive favors, no. If you expect a practice that changes you from the inside, that gives you peace, clarity, strength, better decisions, the capacity to forgive the unforgivable, the accumulated evidence across centuries says yes. The universal experience of repetition. And here I want to speak about something I discovered in the research that left me speechless. The phenomenology of the repetitive experience is astonishingly similar across every tradition in the world. The Hindu who repeats Om Namah Shivaya 108 times with a Rudraksha mala. The Sufi who repeats Allah until he loses awareness of himself. The Orthodox monk who murmurs the Jesus prayer with his chotki. The Tibetan Buddhist who recites Om Mani Padme Hum. And the grandmother in any village on earth who prays the Rosary at 5 in the morning, passing wooden beads between her fingers. All of them report the same sequence. First, resistance. The mind rebels against the monotony, It wanders. It gets bored. It wants to do something else. Second, surrender. At some unpredictable moment, the resistance breaks and the repetition acquires its own rhythm that no longer requires voluntary effort. Third, deepening. The words stop being sounds with conceptual meaning and become a kind of vibration that fills the entire interior space. Fourth, silence. And this is the most paradoxical part. Constant repetition produces a deep silence behind the words, as if the repetitive sound were scrubbing the interior landscape clean and revealing a bedrock of stillness that had always been there. The mystics of every tradition agree that this fourth moment is the encounter with the transcendent, whether called God, Brahman, Allah, the void, or simply reality. The repetition is not the destination. It is the vehicle. The beads are not the treasure. They are the map. The great Sufi master Najm al-Din Kubra, who died in 1221, described the repetition of the divine name as a fire that, entering a house, proclaims I and no other, and consumes everything it finds. Each repetition burns away a layer of ego, of worldly attachment, of illusion, until nothing remains except presence. The Way of a Pilgrim, an anonymous 19th-century Russian text, tells the story of a peasant seeking to understand St. Paul's command to pray without ceasing. A spiritual elder teaches him to repeat the Jesus prayer, first 3,000 times a day, then 6,000, then 12,000, until the prayer internalizes itself and begins to repeat on its own, in rhythm with the heartbeat, even during sleep. The pilgrim says, "My heart," with every beat, pronounced 3 words. The repetition had ceased to be an activity of the ego and had become a function of being, as involuntary as breathing. Is that possible? I don't know. But millions of people throughout history have described something like it. And neuroscience confirms that deep, repetitive prayer produces distinct and measurable brain states. What the testimonies reveal. Beyond theory and science, there are the voices, real people. And when you analyze hundreds of testimonies, in books, in internet forums, in online communities, in published and unpublished accounts, patterns emerge that transcend differences of culture, age, and education. The Rosary works consistently across 5 registers. First, as an emotional regulator. People report again and again that the Rosary calms anxiety, eases panic, helps with insomnia, sustains them through grief. A young man with attention deficit describes how nothing centers him like the Rosary, how the chance to be in focused silence on a single idea is a rare gift for his habitually scattered mind. A college student who suffers panic attacks discovers something remarkable. It's almost impossible to be in a panic and pray the Rosary at the same time. The repetition, combined with the movement of his fingers over the beads, helps him regulate his breathing during crisis moments. Second, as a behavioral anchor. For people whose lives are chaotic, the Rosary provides structure and routine. It is the fixed point of the day, the thing that doesn't change when everything else is changing. Third, as a catalyst for change. People who struggled with addictions, broken relationships, paralyzing decisions report that the Rosary was the turning point. Rarely instantaneous, gradual, like water carving stone. Fourth, as a relational bridge. The Rosary connects couples, families, communities, generations. Father Patrick Peyton said it in a phrase that became his legacy. The family that prays together stays together. This is not a pious slogan. It is an observation confirmed by decades of pastoral experience. Couples who pray together create a space of shared vulnerability that strengthens intimacy in a way few other things can. You are saying, in silence, I trust you with my fears, my hopes, my failures, and I place them next to yours before God. That is more intimate than any late-night conversation. Fifth, as a contemplative portal. A subset of people describe experiences that qualify as encounters with the transcendent. Moments when prayer stops being an act and becomes a presence. Moments they cannot explain with words, but that mark them permanently. And there is one particularly telling pattern that appears again and again. People pray the Rosary, their lives improve. They stop praying it, their lives deteriorate. They return to the Rosary, things improve again. One woman writes, "Sometimes I would forget to pray the Rosary, or I'd get lazy and skip a night or two. During the bad periods, I'd drop the habit for weeks or even months. Then my life would start coming apart at the seams, and I'd find myself reaching for those beads again. It's been over a decade of rosaries, and my life is profoundly different." What extraordinary lives teach us. I want to talk now about people whose lives embody the power of the Rosary in ways that can't be dismissed. Not as distant stained glass figures, but as testimonies that teach us something concrete. Karl Wojtyła, the man who would become John Paul II, grew up surrounded by death. His mother died when he was 8. His brother died when he was 12. His father when he was 20. Loneliness and loss were his constant companions. In the middle of that suffering, a mystic tailor named John Tyranowski taught him Marian spirituality. The Rosary became the spine of his interior life. Decades later, as Pope, he confessed that he prayed the entire Rosary, the 15 mysteries of that time, every single day. And on May 13, 1981, when a bullet tore through his abdomen in St. Peter's Square, he was convinced that the Virgin of Fatima had deflected that bullet. He traveled to Fatima to give thanks and placed the bullet in the crown of the Virgin's statue. In 2002, with Parkinson's already visible in his trembling body, he published the letter in which he added the luminous mysteries. That was not an administrative act, it was a spiritual testament. His way of saying that, after surviving Nazism, communism, an assassination attempt, and a degenerative disease, the Rosary remained his most reliable resource. What does John Paul II teach us? That the Rosary is not for easy seasons. It is precisely for the impossible ones. And then there is Immaculée Ilibagiza, Rwanda, April 1994. Immaculée, a 24-year-old woman, hid in a tiny bathroom alongside 7 other women while outside the militias slaughtered her people with machetes. Her father, her mother, her brothers would be found among the murdered. For 91 days she remained hidden. Her only personal possession was a rosary her father had given her. In her memoir, Left to Tell, she describes how at first the prayers were mechanical, empty repetitions born of pure terror. But gradually, something shifted. The Rosary became an interior space where hatred could not enter. When the killers searched the house and their footsteps echoed on the other side of the door, she prayed and felt what she describes as a wall of peace separating her from the horror. When she was freed, she weighed less than 65 pounds. She had lost nearly her entire family, but she did something that stunned the world. She visited the man who had killed her mother and her brother in prison. And she said to him, "I forgive you." When people asked her how that was possible, she pointed to the Rosary. Immaculée's book teaches something no theological treatise can teach with the same force. The Rosary does not prevent suffering. It creates an interior space where suffering does not destroy the human being. The distinction between protection from pain and preservation of the soul in the midst of pain is the core of her testimony. And Bartolo Longo, a 19th-century Italian lawyer who had been ordained as a satanic priest. He lived tormented, at the edge of suicide. One day he remembered a sermon about the Rosary, fell to his knees, and said, "If your words are true, that whoever spreads your Rosary will be saved, then I will not leave this earth without spreading your Rosary." He built the Basilica of Our Lady of the Rosary of Pompeii. He founded orphanages, schools. He was beatified by John Paul II, who called him a man saved by the Rosary. What does Bartolo Longo teach? That the Rosary is not for the perfect. It is for the shattered. It is for those who have hit rock bottom and need a new starting point. It is not decoration. Let it be said, the Rosary is not a necklace. It is not a fashion accessory. It is not an ornament for your rearview mirror. A rosary with beads polished by use is more beautiful than a new one stored in a drawer. Padre Pio's rosary beads were translucent from being passed through his fingers so many times. That is a rosary fulfilling its purpose. This is not a judgment against anyone who wears one around their neck. Sometimes wearing a visible rosary is the first step. Sometimes a rosary hanging from the mirror is a silent reminder. But the invitation is clear. Let it be a tool worn smooth by use, not an object displayed for aesthetics. Nothing is too big or too small. You can pray the Rosary for world peace, and you can pray the Rosary to find a parking spot. There is no petition too grand and none too trivial. In Matthew 6, verses 28 through 30, Jesus says, "Consider how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of them. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you?" And in Luke 12, verse 7, he adds, "Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. If God counts the hairs on your head and cares for the lilies no one notices, he cares about your exam, your job interview, your argument with your partner, and yes, your parking spot." The idea that we should only bother God with important things is a form of pride disguised as humility. God wants you to talk to him about everything. The Rosary is the perfect format for that. In each decade, you can place a different intention. One for your health, another for your family, another for your work, another for that person you find hard to love, and yes, another for the traffic to clear. If words have power, imagine prayers. If words have power, and they do, a word can start a war or declare peace, destroy a marriage or rebuild it. Then prayers have a multiplied power, because they are words directed at the source of all power. And if one prayer has power, imagine 53 prayers spoken with intention, with faith, with love. Imagine 200 if you pray all 4 sets of mysteries. Imagine years of accumulated prayers, like a spiritual savings account generating compound interest. And maybe, just maybe, out of those dozens of Hail Marys you prayed today, one of them was spoken with perfect devotion, with exactly the right intention, with precisely the faith that was needed. And that single prayer, that one perfect rose among the 50, was enough to rearrange something in your life without your knowing how or when. Pray together. Pray the Rosary with your partner. And if you're embarrassed to suggest it, or if the idea makes you uncomfortable, pay attention to that discomfort. Because if you cannot kneel with someone before God, it might be worth asking yourself why. Couples who pray together create a space of shared vulnerability that strengthens intimacy in a way nothing else can. You are saying, without words, I trust you with the deepest part of me, and I place it alongside the deepest part of you before something greater than both of us. Every apparition asks the same thing. There is a pattern worth noting. In virtually every Marian apparition recognized or under study by the Church, the Virgin has asked for the same thing. Fatima, 1917. I am the Lady of the Rosary. Pray the Rosary every day. Lourdes, 1858. The Virgin appeared with a rosary in her hand, and the first thing she asked of Bernadette was that she pray hers. Akita, Japan, 1973. Pray the Rosary frequently. Medjugorje, from 1981. The request includes praying 3 full rosaries daily. Kibeho, Rwanda. The Virgin asked for the praying of the Rosary of the 7 Sorrows. If there is a constant message across all the apparitions, it is not build temples or perform extreme penances. It is pray the Rosary. The simplicity and the insistence of that request should tell us something. The 15 Promises of the Virgin of the Rosary. Tradition attributes to Blessed Alain de la Roche, a 15th-century Dominican friar, 15 promises that the Virgin Mary is said to have made to those who pray the Rosary with devotion. According to his book De Dignitate Saltari, the Virgin appeared to him asking him to revive devotion to the Rosary. As she departed, she told him, "Preach all that you have seen and heard, and do not fear, for I will always be with you and with all the faithful of my Rosary." These are the 15 promises, as Blessed Alain transmitted them. First, whoever prays my Rosary faithfully will receive every grace they ask of me. Second, I promise my special protection and great graces to those who devoutly pray my Rosary. Third, the Rosary is a shield against hell, a destroyer of vice, a deliverer from sin, and a slayer of heresy. Fourth, the Rosary causes virtue to flourish so that souls may obtain divine mercy. It replaces the love of the world with the love of God in human hearts and lifts them to desire the things of heaven and eternity. Those souls will sanctify themselves by this means. Fifth, the soul that commends itself to me through the Rosary will not perish. Sixth, whoever prays the Rosary devoutly and carries its mysteries as a testimony of life will not know misfortune. God will not punish them in his justice. They will not die a violent death, and if they are just, they will remain in God's grace and will have the reward of eternal life. Seventh, whoever is truly devoted to the Rosary will not die without the holy sacraments. Eighth, those who pray the Holy Rosary with great faith in life and in the hour of their death will find the light of God and the fullness of his grace. In the hour of death, they will share in paradise through the merits of the saints. Ninth, I will deliver from purgatory those who devoutly pray the Rosary. 10th, the faithful children of the Rosary will earn a high degree of glory in heaven. 11th, they will obtain all that they ask of me through the Rosary. 12th, those who spread my Rosary will be helped by me in their needs. 13th, I have asked my Son for the grace that all members and devotees may have as brothers and sisters, in life and in death, all the blessed of the heavenly court. 14th, those who pray the Rosary are my beloved children, and brothers and sisters of my only Son, Jesus. 15th, devotion to the Holy Rosary is a manifest sign of predestination to glory. Now, it is important to understand the spirit of these promises. They are not a magic contract. They do not function as a vending machine where you insert prayers and receive favors. The key lies in the words that repeat in each one, with devotion, with faith, as a testimony of life. A rosary prayed with an open heart transforms the one who prays it. And that interior transformation is what opens the doors to the graces promised. As the tradition warns, no one can live continuously in sin and keep praying the rosary. Either they will leave the sin or they will leave the rosary. The promises are not for collectors of prayers. They are for people willing to be changed by what they pray. What the experience of millions confirms is that those who pray with constancy experience real transformations. More peace, more clarity, more fortitude, less fear, better decisions, and a growing capacity to face adversity without breaking. Observe your transformation. It doesn't matter how many books you read about the Rosary. It doesn't matter how many priests tell you to pray it. It doesn't matter how many testimonies you hear or how much science you review. None of that will truly convince you. The only thing that will convince you is your own experience. What you yourself see change in your life when you begin to pray with constancy. That is the evidence no one can give you. That you have to build yourself. And here I want to give you a practical piece of advice that can change the entire experience. Keep a journal. Write down what you prayed, what you felt, what happened that day. Combine the rosary with prayer notes. After 3 months, read your notes from the beginning. You will be surprised. Not necessarily because spectacular miracles occurred, though sometimes they do, but because you will see a pattern. More peace, better decisions, relationships healing, fears shrinking. The person who started praying on the first page is not the same person reading those notes 3 months later. The transformation of the rosary is not like a lightning bolt. It is like a sunrise. There is no exact moment when darkness becomes light. But when you look back, the difference is undeniable. The questions that matter. Throughout this research, I encountered questions that have no easy answers, but that deserve to be thought about. I want to share a few with an invitation. Take what resonates with you. What feels true, what speaks to you, keep it. And what doesn't resonate, let it go without a second thought. Not everything has to be for you. Not everything has to be now. Can a practice function simultaneously as prayer and as a relaxation technique without one dimension canceling the other? I believe it can. I believe the scientific explanation does not disenchant the religious experience. Knowing that the rosary synchronizes your heart rate does not make God disappear from the equation. It is possible that God designed the human body to respond to prayer in exactly that way. Science describes the mechanism. Faith names the inventor. What does the rosary say about the nature of repetition? Is there something here that transcends the religious and touches the very essence of how we learn, how we love, how we create? Think of music. A melody is repetition with variation. Think of ocean waves. Each one is identical to and different from the one before. Think of the seasons, of heartbeats, of the cycle of day and night. Repetition is not the enemy of depth. It is the carrier. All of life is built on rhythms that repeat, and each repetition is an opportunity to go deeper. Is the rosary an example of what philosophers call embodied knowledge? Do the hands that pass the beads know something the conceptual mind cannot articulate? There are people who cannot explain why the rosary transforms them, but their hands reach for the beads every night with the same certainty with which lungs reach for air. Maybe there is a wisdom in the fingers that the head hasn't yet found words for. And finally, the hardest question of all. How do we process the prayers that seem to go unanswered? Sometimes you pray with your whole soul, and what you ask for does not come. What do you do with that? I want to offer you an image. Imagine a small child asking his father for something. If the father asked, "What do you want?" the child would probably ask for a mountain of chocolate, candy, ice cream, and permission to stay up until 3 in the morning. And the father, who loves him, is going to give him something different, something that nourishes him, that protects him, that helps him grow, not because he ignores the child's request, but because he sees further than the child can. Maybe that is how prayer works. Prayers are always answered, just not always in the way we expect. Sometimes what we ask for is not what we need, and sometimes what we receive, though it looks nothing like what we imagined, is exactly what our hearts needed without knowing it. This can be profoundly true and profoundly frustrating at the same time. I know. But the invitation is to open your eyes wider, to look more broadly, to trust that there is a wisdom operating beyond what we can see. The power of the Rosary is not the power to control outcomes. It is the power to sustain a person through outcomes, including the devastating ones, and to offer a framework of meaning in which even loss can be integrated. The spiritual war. I want to speak about something modern culture prefers to ignore, but that the Catholic spiritual tradition takes with complete seriousness. When you take the rosary in your hands, according to the tradition, you are not performing a decorative act. You are declaring a position in an invisible war, and the testimonies of exorcism confirm it in ways that raise every hair on your body. Father Gabriele Amorth, one of the Church's most renowned exorcists, recounted that during an exorcism, forced to speak, the evil said, "Every Hail Mary of the Rosary is a blow to the head for me. If Christians knew the power of the Rosary, it would be my end." Saint Bernard said the Rosary makes hell tremble and puts demons to flight. He was not using decorative metaphors. He was speaking of a reality the Church recognizes as part of the faith. You don't have to accept this literally to feel its weight. But if you do, the Rosary ceases to be a pious practice and becomes something far more serious. Every Hail Mary is an act. Every mystery, a position. Every complete Rosary, a declaration. David's sling. And I want to use a metaphor I believe captures everything. David, a young shepherd with no armor, no sword, no military training, brought down the giant Goliath with 5 smooth stones and a sling. The military experts had him dead already. Goliath laughed at him. The Rosary is David's sling. It is a weapon that looks absurd to the eyes of the world. A handful of beads, some repetitive prayers, an object that fits in your pocket. The giants of our lives, anxiety, addiction, fear, illness, resentment, laugh at something so small. But David didn't trust in the sling. He trusted in God. And the 5 smooth stones he chose from the stream are like the 5 mysteries of each rosary. Joyful, luminous, sorrowful, glorious. And the 5th mystery is you. Your life offered through prayer. The stone that felled Goliath was not magic. It was an ordinary stone launched with extraordinary faith. Every Hail Mary is an ordinary stone. But launched with faith, it brings down giants. Mary, undoer of knots. And I want to end with an image, the image this book carries at its heart. There is a Marian devotion that Pope Francis discovered during his studies in Germany and brought to Argentina, where it became one of the most beloved devotions on the continent. It is called Mary, Undoer of Knots. The original painting, created around 1700, shows Mary patiently untying the knots of a long ribbon while angels hold it for her. The knots represent the problems, the conflicts, the illnesses, the ruptures, the addictions, the resentments, all those tangles of life that seem impossible to undo. And the rosary, with its beads sliding one by one through the fingers, is precisely that, a way to untie knots. Each Hail Mary loosens a thread. Each mystery releases a tension. And by the end of the rosary, something that was tight has been loosened. Something tangled has been clarified. Something that seemed impossible has become a little more possible. There is an irony worth noting. You have been listening to a book about the rosary when you could have been praying the rosary. The time it takes to listen to a chapter of this book is roughly the time it takes to pray 5 decades. Pick up your rosary. If you don't have one, use your fingers. They work the same. Pray 1 decade. Just one. 10 Hail Marys. 2 minutes. And when you finish, don't stand up right away. Stay for a moment in silence. Let the last words dissolve and listen to what remains. Because something will have happened in those minutes. Something subtle, perhaps. Something almost imperceptible. A loosening. A breath. A single second of interior silence in the middle of all the noise. And that second, that bead, that rose, is where everything begins. To Mary, undoer of knots, who leaves no knot untied when we ask her in faith.